Week 15 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers I looked at off the wire this week. The first kicker, Riley Patterson of the Miami Dolphins. Patterson, the last few weeks, he's going out there and he's putting up big points 3 weeks in a row now with double-digit fantasy points for Riley Patterson. He's available in 95% of fantasy leagues. This week, another good matchup coming up at the Steelers. A bend but don't break defense gives up the 6th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So the last few weeks for Patterson, week 11 versus the Commanders, 11. Week 13 versus New Orleans, 14. And week 14 at the Jets, 13 fantasy points. So he's been taking advantage of good matchups. Well, all those matchups were versus defenses that give up top 10 points to kickers on the season. So this week with another one on the schedule, even though we know this Dolphin team doesn't really play good in bad weather, even that came off a good victory in cold New York at the New York Jets. I think Patterson, he's going to get his opportunities. And we know the Steelers are a bend but don't break type of defense. Next kicker, Will Richard of the Minnesota Vikings. So they're versus the Dallas Cowboys this week. And last week the Cowboys gave up 44 points in that ball game to Detroit. But I know obviously this offense isn't anywhere near the Detroit Lions is this Minnesota Viking team. But at least with J.J. McCarthy in there, opportunities have been there all season long for Will Richard. So the last few games, week 11 versus the Bears, 5. Week 12 at Green Bay, 10. Week 13 at Seattle, it was a buzzsaw. They got shut out in that ball game. And then week 14 versus the Commanders, 8. Week 15, a good matchup with the Cowboys. Give up the 17th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. Obviously, indoor games, Sunday Night Football as well. And Will Richard, he's the type of kicker that 50-plus yards isn't a factor for him and not dealing with outside elements. And this Cowboy team, besides last week, the last 3-4 weeks before that, were a bend but don't break defense. I think Richard, he's going to get opportunities. And we saw with Jake Bates last week versus same defense, put up 16 fantasy points. I think with Richard, you could go out there, add him, and have confidence with him in your lineup. And he's available in 75% of fantasy leagues. Next kicker, Cairo Santos of the Chicago Bears. So Cairo Santos, it's been a solid season for him for the most part for the Chicago Bear team. I know this offense has been up and down for the majority of the season, but Santos, the last 3 out of 4 games, 8 or more fantasy points in the time. Week 11 in Minnesota, 15. Week 12 versus Pittsburgh, 8. Week 13 at Philly, 6. And week 14 at Green Bay, 8 fantasy points. So this week, a good matchup versus the Browns, where they've been a good defense this season, even though I know they had a bad ball game, giving up 31 points in the loss versus the Tennessee Titans last week. Give up the 13th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. I know it's in cold Chicago, Soldier Field, especially this time of year in December. The wind really blows and the field conditions aren't ideal at times. But I think Cairo Santos, it just doesn't matter. He's been used to Chicago and he's been one of the better, more accurate kickers in the league over the last 3-4 seasons. So definitely a kicker there, and he's on a pretty high-powered offense, available 77% of fantasy leagues. Next kicker, Harrison Mevis of the Los Angeles Rams. I know Mevis, he's not getting a lot of long field goals, where this Ram team seems like every drive they're in the red zone in the short yards, where he's only getting 20, 30-yard attempts, or they're finding the end zone. So Mevis, he's taken over since week 10 after Joshua Carty had some missed problems. So week 12 versus Tampa Bay, 13. Week 13 at Carolina, 4. And week 14 at Arizona, 9 fantasy points. So this week, Detroit coming in. Obviously, an indoor game, always a plus, where Los Angeles plays at SoFi, one of the better stadiums and newest stadiums in the league. And could be a high-scoring game, obviously, between these two teams. So, like I said, Mevis, he's been solid so far since they brought him in Week 10 as this Ram team. And anytime you're on a high-powered offense, opportunities will be there. But let's just hope it's not just extra points. And he's available right now in 84% of fantasy leagues. And the final kicker, Zane Gonzalez of the Atlanta Falcons. I've mentioned Zane Gonzalez a lot over the last couple weeks. He's been the 3rd kicker on the season for this Atlanta Falcon team. They started with Young Hoku. He just couldn't get the job done. Then they went to Parker Romo, and now to Zane Gonzalez over the last month and a half. So the last few games for Zane Gonzalez, week 12 in New Orleans, 15. Week 13 at the Jets, 8. And week 14 versus the Seahawks, 10. So this week, a good matchup at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Their defense really isn't all that good, and they give up the 16th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. But we know their defense, they've got teams in the red zone a decent amount, and we just saw New Orleans go in there and upset them. So this week, I think Zane Gonzalez could get opportunities, and he's available in 97% of fantasy leagues. That's a few kickers I looked at off the wire for week 15 of the fantasy football season.